Thank you.
Thanks. Do I need to press a button?
Looks a bit like it.
I do. I haven't got my glasses on. I'm here, by the way, to do your cabaret. This man here keeps pointing. Oh, yeah, another man. Go on. I think I know what to do, but anyway. That's it. Lovely. Serious and yet light-hearted first slide. We shouldn't laugh, really. However, images really do matter. If I wander away from this microphone, will you kind of tether me back and go, so as I know what the problem is? So I'm going to give you a whole series of images tonight. Most of them make us laugh or certainly ponder. And this first one is a favourite of mine. You'll see it's dated 1987. That was when my interest in ageing began. Now, in 1987, I was just a slip of a lass, and my interest in ageing was anything but personal. It was one of those issues that was for them. Isn't it funny? Ageing is one of those few things that we all kind of dread, and yet we usually prefer it to the alternative. Now, in 1987, you'll all remember it, it was when the marketing people started to cut their teeth on all kinds of little symbols. And it was, I love New York, or closer to home, I love my mini metro. And I think even Glasgow got in on it with I love Glasgow.
It's not such a bad place.
And here's this Desperate Dan character. And I thought it said on his T-shirt, I love grannies. Of course, it says I club grannies. And of course, I laughed on both occasions. Now, you will discover as this evening and tomorrow morning goes on, I'm a sociologist. I used to be proud of that fact until I found a little graffiti in the ladies' toilet at Warwick University. I was only visiting. And it said, get your sociology degrees here, with an arrow pointing to the toilet roll. So I've always been slightly dubious about admitting the fact that I am a sociologist. But in relation to this Desperate Dan character, I club grannies. This was the beginning of my interest in ageing, because I don't think there's any other instance of life on earth where it is funny to say, I club. I'll just give you one instance. Try I club seal pups. It doesn't work. So how come it's acceptable? And I laughed when I saw I club grannies. What's going on? Well, what's going on is a dynamic called the bizarre return of repressed behaviour. The bizarre return of repressed behaviour. Hands up if you like ITV3. Come on, come on. ITV3, it's all the kind of Morse and Morse's successors, and it's all about detectives, and it's all about death. It's all about death. It's most peculiar that we should allow death into our lives under the banner of entertainment. That's another illustration of the bizarre return of repressed behaviour. Often it is humour that lets the cat out of the bag, that will use humour to speak of something which is really quite profound and an indication that our society is not handling this terrain very well. And sure enough, the issue of ageing, and I'm going to stay on my sociological hobby horse and say ageing is a gendered issue. It affects men and women quite differently. It is very much a woman's issue, ageing, because of our greater longevity. And I've left that lecture at home as to tell you why it is that women live longer than men. But if you ask me nicely, I'll tell you. So here we have this illustration on his T-shirt, I Club Grannies, that clue that the issue of ageing and of aged women is something that our society is keeping under wraps, is uncomfortable about, is immature about, is not thinking creatively about. And what exposes it? A cartoon. But I'm still interested in this issue of death. Can you remember Chief Inspector Lockhart? Come on, you can. New Scotland Yard. And you remember he'd be investigating murders, but what you would see chalked on the pavement was the outline of where the dead body had laid. Now what you see? You see the cadaver on the slab, and the camera lingers over it. Entertainment? How odd is that? So well done for voting to come to these days, because what you're saying is that that kind of unhealthy mystery, that unhealthy attitude to the business of age and dying is not something that you're party to. But I'm afraid it's something that our society is party to, and there seems to be very little evidence that we're getting any healthier or wiser in relation to this issue of old age. Now, if the men are feeling a little bit left out, I've got another one for you. For those who, like me, have left their glasses at home, it says, have you had the batteries out of your granddad's pacemaker? And of course, it's that wonderful clue about how in our society there's kind of a sense of who's valued the most. And the older we get, the more our value seems to just trickle off. And maybe that's no bad thing. But it does mean that there's work to do. That new humility that comes with being older. But certainly, when we're thinking about ageing, we have to think about generations. And of course, for many who are younger than most of us assembled here, it does feel as if people like me, I was born 1953, I'm a classical baby boomer, that we do seem to have been the lucky generation, that we have been the ones who've claimed the first fruits. So maybe it's only fair to get your own back by pinching a pacemaker. Real women don't have hot flushes, they have power surges. Now there's a threat. Now I've included this particular cartoon not for what's written around it, but because I want you to have some sympathy for the poor cartoonist who is suddenly being required to depict old women. Now, where I grew up in Liverpool, there was a store, Blacklers, where old women shopped. Because old women at a certain point would have a certain type of shoe, certainly particular underwear, certainly the hat, and that if you failed to dress appropriately, you would be mutton dressed as lamb. That would be the sanction. For men, by the way, it was just beige, and it still is. So now for most of us, it is a case of first up, best dressed, because the way in which we older people dress is kind of not age related. We can present ourselves as we wish, and the sanctions have just seemed to have disappeared. Was that your experience? Was the town you grew up have a certain store for older people? Can I have some examples? Haberdasheries, yes, haberdasheries would be, yes. But of course that was also about mending rather than, yeah. But most towns would have, and usually there'd be a very nice kind of tea shop tucked away with proper waitresses. Oh dear, I do regret it. I've got another slide just to give you that idea of how we used to dress. I kind of love this. It's a church hall, and it's kind of a nightmare for health and safety. You know, things are stacked up at the back and they might fall and hit you. Of course, some church warden or circuit steward would have stopped that immediately. But even the way in which you sit, there was a way of sitting, and there were these sanctions that came at particular stages in our life, and certainly some for men and some for women. Do you remember doffing of hats? And then the other one was men walking on the outside of the pavement. My old dad used to say, as he shuffled round to be on the outside, "I'm not frightened of horses." I'm not that old, by the way.
Some of us still do it.
So, indeed, yeah. And of course, how difficult it is now for men to work out whether to maintain those particular ways of behaving associated with being a gentleman. I notice people coming into church now with hats, men, and it's almost been lost that a man never wore a hat in church. All of us have a decision to make. Each time somebody ignores those kinds of gentlemanly behaviours or femininity, do we allow it to kind of get under our defences and drive us batty, or do we just let it go? But surely we are the generation of people who've had to accommodate to such a rapid change in the ways in which people behave. And of course here, where are the children? No. You know, children seen and not heard. I just love those chairs. Do you remember them? They were like tubular frames with a canvas seat. They were probably the best of the lot because you could manoeuvre them easy enough, you know, drag them along. And of course, do you notice the polished shoes? And of course, what we're doing is reminiscing, and we love it. It's kind of scary. This is, I think it was in Tate Modern. Wax. And it's the way the artist has depicted two older women. And you can get that hint of malevolence that is associated with them, that kind of look, as if to say, who are you? And of course, what's happened is that the jaws have gone down. And that's a kind of an inevitability. But it's easier, it's less tiring for jaws to be in that relaxed position. And in some ways we have a responsibility about the shape our face takes. And that's just a little warning to us that our posture, whether we are as curmudgeonly as these or not, that's the initial image. And that's what the artist is reflecting back to us. I find that a really kind of heavy-duty image. I love this. Okay, your father's managed to get a mouse. Now, how do we use it? There is a different world out there, and we are the immigrants. We are the ones who are struggling to make sense of what's going on. And I kind of love this one because you can just imagine the effort that's been gone on to get the mouse. And of course what it means is that we have to just launch out and trust that these systems will work. And that is just a little hint of all the other times when we will have to launch out and trust that the system will work for us, whether that be in relation to health or social care or neighbourliness. So our rotten old computers, which we've kind of been dragged screaming and kicking to have to use, are just a little clue about what it's like never to be completely in control. I'm not sure whether this is my favourite or the next one. But there's this glorious act of defiance going on here. And I think we kind of need to embrace that likewise. Interestingly, she strikes me as being 100. And she strikes me as somebody who's probably had a hard life. Because by the time we get into our 70s, our faces often do speak of the overwhelmings that we've had in our lives. And of course, what is very clear is that our longevity is closely related to our affluence. I now live in London, and they say that if you come down on the Piccadilly line from Cockfosters through into Caledonian, wherever it is, Arsenal, that area, that you lose 6 months longevity the closer you get to London, because the neighbourhoods become poorer. So one of the things that ageing cannot mask is that the poorer you are, the younger you're likely to die. And of course that applies not just within our own nation, but within nations around the globe. One of the most interesting places, of course, is Russia. The Russian mortality rate has increased, so as longevity, particularly of men, has been diminishing over the last 20 years. And that's to do with vodka. And maybe to do with a loss of organisation and a sense of purpose and competition. Very interesting study for some sociologist who's got their degree from. I don't know how they did that, but it's wonderful, isn't it? And of course, what this is speaking of is that business that as we age, we have to relinquish prowess. And the big challenge that the moment comes when we say, "Do you know what, I'm not going to tax the car anymore, or I'm not going to insure the car." And sometimes we need others to tell us that. I used to think that it was pretty hardcore to have to give birth. But I tell you, it's even more hardcore to have to grow old into all these strippings away of our competencies and our capacities. One of the things, my background is in mission in poor communities, urban mission. And when you're poor, you are subject to more overwhelmings. You will not have been able to listen to the Radio 4 story at 10 o'clock or 11:15 at the moment. And it's of a couple, young couple, trying to make a nest together, already a bit wrong-footed, and the bath from the neighbour who lives above leaks and comes through their roof and destroys what bit of stuff they've got. One step forward and a couple of steps back. The poorer you are, the more likely you are to be subject to overwhelmings. But the same becomes true in relation to later life. Whether it be a sudden illness, whether it be any host of things, and it can happen any moment. Of course, it can happen in earlier days, but the odds are not quite so stacked up as they are for those of us as we age. So we are living with this extraordinary awareness that we are moving closer and closer to multiple and multi-directional overwhelmings. As this, I think he's a German pointer, has just recognised. He's on the cusp of something. It's our cliff. 2013, 2 years ago, this was the last year he decided that he would do a calendar, besporting himself. And of course, what we are party to now, if he's born in 1940, that makes him what? 75. So he would have been 73 there. Now, it might be that he gave up disporting himself because it took so much preparation that he couldn't face going through it, or he'd probably have to have his cheeks. But there is this extraordinary feature now about the effort to stay young. And I don't know quite what that's about. The lauding of youthfulness. And we see it here with our cliff. And as I say, at the age of 73, has given up showing himself on a motorbike with his wonderful 6-pack, is it? I don't know, I haven't counted. I think it's only a 4-pack. Yeah, it's good enough, isn't it? The tan helps. Having your teeth fixed helps. But I believe if you have your teeth fixed, you then have to have your gums fixed, and then you have to have your lips filled. That there is a whole process that you then, once you've started, you have to continue. I'm thinking of Anne, what's her name? Another Scouser. Anne Robinson. Sorry, yes. It wasn't very Christian, was it? And this isn't very Christian either. It says, Terry hadn't done a funeral since February. And there he is, stretching a string across the path of somebody who's enjoying buggy. For those of you who are Church of England, you will know that St. Gargoyles, or you might not, is the cartoon that's carried in the church Times. So we're not just talking about how the world fails to cope well and honourably with later life. That carries into the church. And perhaps that, of all of the cartoons and images that I've shown you, it's that one which I find most troubling. And it's not particularly old, it's only about 3 years old. And I just takes my breath away. Sitting Pretty, festival goers at Glastonbury. And there is something about, that poem, When I Grow Old I Shall Wear Purple? Literally letting hair down. And all those 50 sausages that were delivered this morning, eating them all in one go. And that clearly is one of the things that happens as we grow older. We lose that fear of being labelled as eccentric. In fact, you can almost echo a theological statement, I am who I am. And I'm not afraid of the slurs of eccentricity. Now, there is an extraordinary positive gain that comes from that. Because what's happening is that people are not concerned with managing the impression that they give. So the younger we are, the more likely we are to think about the impact and the desire to have a positive, upbeat impact on those around me, particularly in employment and in the workspace, to give a good impression. As we get older, that urge seems to melt away. And it does two wonderful things. One of them is that we are able to express the essence of what matters to us in terms of our faith, warts and all. So instead of presenting a great systematic, it all adds up vision of faith, the older person has the capacity to say, well, I don't really get fussed about that, but what matters to me is. I've heard it rumoured that those emerging nations that received missionaries from the West used to ponder why it was that it was young people who tended to be missionaries. Because what do young people know about faith? Faith has to be tested through all those multiple overwhelmings that are part and parcel of life. So what we know for sure is that as we age as Christians, our capacity to be evangelists is probably more purposeful, more focused, more true than it might ever have been before. But the other thing that happens when we let go of that need to be thought well of, to use my sociological jargon, to be concerned about the presentation of self in everyday circumstances. When we let go of that, and we think, well, I'm sitting pretty, I'm in a mess, but anyway, I've had a good time. What happens is that all that energy that's used to manage the impact we have gets translated into resilience. Because what's clear from the research is that it is older people who are the ones who carry resilience, which of course is just as well, given the likelihood of overwhelmings that will be near at hand. These are kind of creepy pictures. This is the way you're meant to look when you reach a certain age. This is the way the world wants to see us. In love, probably for the third time around, and working together, probably planning our holidays. And of course, the world has no idea about what to do with older people. We probably are the generation that has been blessed by this stature of being retired. We may be the last generation that has the luxury of being retired. Which is, there is another lecture urging to get out. It really is appalling. It is cheap grace to solve the pensions crisis by increasing the retirement age. I've started, so I've finished. The reason why? Because retirement, when it was of a fixed age, it meant that those who were junior could anticipate when you might move up. It was a good management tool for a compliant workforce. Good or bad, you can decide for yourselves. But it also meant that the most expensive workers left the employ, because in a world where increments are still paid, usually the oldest members of staff are the ones who are paid most. So it's, from the employer's point of view, it was a good thing. And I suspect that in the next 10 years, one of the crises will be, how do we get rid of all these old people? But what really starts to matter is that for young people, never before has it been so hard to get a narrative of occupation, a story of work that I'm pleased and competent to do. That is almost without... Sorry, I've just been distracted by a rabbit and a crow. Oh, 2 rabbits. Oh, they're having a lovely time. Yes. I don't mind. Oh, she was very good, but she was distracted by rabbits. That's the way I'll go out. So we have this issue about retirement. And of course, as Christians, it's not as if we give up work and labour, because work is that which brings out the best in us. It's when we start to talk about vocation. When we are seniors and retired, and let's hope that retirement remains people's story, people's lifespan involves retirement, because it gives us our chance to be dangerous. The only thing that they've never learnt to stop is our pensions for bad behaviour. So the real kind of risky, courageous work maybe belongs to those who are in 3rd age into 4th age. But our society has very few images about later life. And of course the images that get used are very gendered. So if you're a chap, the image is 1 foot in the grave. If you're a woman, the image was, remember the Golden Girls? It was about a kind of a replay of adolescence, but with money in your pocket and few of the hazards. And we'll finish with the Queen. Most interesting, because we will all remember a time not long after Diana's death when she was pilloried, that this was a woman who was out of touch. And now she is someone whom we profoundly look up to and kind of presume and see an integrity. And I just wonder whether that is a bit of a God's gift to a nation, which has to kind of come to terms with the fact that there are as many people over the age of 65 as there are youngsters under the age of 18 in our society. And that's kind of where I leave it. Nothing left. Any thoughts, any images, any comments? Ooh, you've all gone funny on me. You've all gone... Might have to speak. Doesn't matter. Are you going to run with the microphone? Thanks, Robin. Any thoughts? Somebody will have to have a thought, because we can't just go like that, can we? Somebody have to say something. Right at the back, just to keep you fit. Oh no, right at the back and in the middle. He's parading with his legs.
The difficulty of knowing whether you should give up your seat to someone.
Yes, yes, yes. More difficult for men than for women. And the other one, at a certain stage, the difficulty of knowing whether you should accept or not. Yes, yes, thank you. Yes, please.